переробити законодавчу базу, повернути практику примусового вилучення пам'яток, посилити покарання за їхню руйнацію, запровадити публічні конкурси на реставрацію з громадським обговоренням проєктів та визначенням чітких термінів реалізації, налагодити комунікацію між різними органами влади, що мають різні дані про власників та не можуть їх встановити, нарешті перенести всі дані з паперових реєстрів в електронні, аби не дати їм остаточно загубитися. Журналісти та громадські активісти роками намагаються привернути увагу до проблеми збереження пам'яток, аби разом врятувати хоч одну. Але все це спрацює лише за політичної волі, сміливості брати відповідальність та публічно звітувати про кожен свій крок.
На сьогодні це все. З вами була програма «Схеми». Це спільний проєкт Радіо Свобода та телеканалу ЮА Перший. Зустрінемось рівно за тиждень. Щасти!
Good evening from our headquarters in Kyiv. This is the Sunday show at Hromadske International, the only prime-time show in English explaining Eastern European geopolitical storm. And I'm Natalia Humanyuk.
And I'm Christian Boris. Today we will take a close look at the blockade in Ukraine. Later on in the studio we have a very special guest. The Canadian ambassador to Ukraine will be joining us for a discussion of Canada's ongoing support to Ukraine. And finally, we'll finish by taking a look at the third anniversary of the fake referendum in Crimea.
And we'll be back in a second.
So Prime Minister Volodymyr Groysman has called them a sabotage against the nation. Others have called them heroes. About 2 months ago, a group of Ukrainian volunteers and war veterans began to block the shipment of goods into and out of the occupied regions in eastern Ukraine. Now, the government of Ukraine has legalized the blockade, and while people are still allowed to cross the line demarcating the territories, trade is now shut down entirely.
We're speaking about the blockade of Donbas, which had become a huge controversy in Ukraine with a very strong sentiment from the different political groups, as some people say that the blockade is the moment when Ukraine had lost Donbas and it had lost billions of US dollars, and the other says there is no other way than to stop it, and there is no way to trade with Russia or have any trade connection with the territories under separatist control where the Ukrainians were dying. So before we go on that, we would remind you what really happens, the most important points of this blockade before we start the discussion with the guests.
Demobilized soldiers and veterans from the volunteer battalions threatened to block all railways leading into the occupied areas of Ukraine if the authorities of the breakaway republics did not release the 110 Ukrainian hostages. On December the 26th, they announced the blockade. The Ukrainian energy sector announced a state of emergency. The authorities from the so-called LPR and DPR announced that, as of the 1st of March, all Ukrainian enterprises in the occupied territories will fall under the control of the self-proclaimed republics. Secret Service forces dispersed the readout of the blockade at the Kryvyi Toret station. The blockade participants were detained, their weapons were seized, but they were released later that evening. This led to a string of protests throughout Ukraine. Clash between police and blockade participants at Slovyansk. Blockade advocates, led by the MP Volodymyr Paraschiy, attempt to break through the police convoy. The convoy of blockade cars was later detained at Kramatorsk. The National Security and Defence Council of Ukraine decided to stop the transportation of goods across the contact line. President Poroshenko declared that transportation will resume once the companies are returned to Ukrainian control and once the ceasefire in Donbass is adhered to.
So we have the guests currently in our studio to discuss, of course, the economic impact of the blockade, and we would also we would discuss the politics as well, but the economy expertise goes first. So we have Hlib Vyshlinsky, who is the Executive Director at the Center for Economic Strategies, and Oleksandr Paraschiy, who is the Head of Research at Concorde Capital. So really, for the start of the discussion, I know there are different positions from the economists, not just from the politicians who explain. So how would you explain the blockade? How much damage or how much good it has done to Ukrainian economy and to the Ukraine as it is? I probably would say, give a word for Hlib.
Yeah, I believe that we have the whole spectrum of the negative effects from the blockade, and by blockade I mean for sure like this initial blockade, because like in terms of direct economic impacts, like most of these impacts are they started from this first initial blockade. By this I mean the destruction of supply chains for energy sector and for ferrous metals industry, and we need to understand that like this separation line, it was like in fact cutting in many points these supply chains that are multiple in this region, because like in fact we need to understand that Donbass is a historical industrial cluster that is based on availability of raw materials, like for example coal, iron ore, and starting from times of Russian Empire as early as end of 19th century, this cluster started to form, and it means that there are multiple cases where, like, one of the most prominent for me is the case of energy supply of Avdiivka, plant that was in the epicenter of the latest like military escalation. And this Avdiivka plant, it is supplied by, like, the electricity to this plant is supplied from the power station that is located on uncontrolled territories, but the coal to this power station is supplied from coal mines on the controlled territories.
And Alexandra, so what would you say on that? Some of the economists count that there are $2 billion of that kind of level of the loss Ukraine has.
Yes. So in generally, I think Hlib and me and central bank economist and our government economist, they have the same number, which is minus 1.5 to minus 2.0 billion dollar losses on current account, losses on economy, and so on and so on. I agree with these numbers, but I understand where these numbers came from. They came from like our statistics, official statistics. Yeah, if we count like number of steel produced on the occupied territory, number of coal produced on the occupied territory, if you multiply it by prices, you will get this number. Let's say $2 billion. Yeah, but it's in static. Yeah, in reality, it will be not that picture, because, for example, last year on the occupied territory we had 3.3 million tons of steel produced. Okay, loss of this 3.3 million is painful. Yes, it is painful, but On the, let's say, mainland Ukraine, we had minus 4.7 million tons of production over the last 3 years. What I'm trying to say that this minus 3 million tons on that territory can be easily substituted by increase of production by raising these idle capacities on the mainland Ukraine.
Is there a plan to do that already?
Well, if we hear our metallurgists, we only see that they are ready to beep, to complain, and so on. But still prices are at their historical, let's say, 2-year high today, yeah? If you, and we have emptied niche, Alchevsky is not working, Yanakeva is not working, we have emptied niche. Come on, guys. Just raise your production, just deliver this GDP, this like theoretical minus 2 billion. You can do it, you can substitute it. Of course, there is some time lag because you need to find some flux, some anthracite, some coking coal, and so on. It may take some time, but come on, prices are pretty high for steel. You can do it. If you want to generate profit, you can. You will do it.
What's the time frame? You say it might take some time. What's the time frame?
Oh, it depends on their efficiency. I don't know efficiency of these sales guys. So I think it could take. We already have 1 month of this blockade as we already discussed, and so I think that it could take for some inputs it could take 2 months. For some input, it could take maybe 3 or 4 months, but it is doable. It is substitutable.
So you think?
I would ask, like, what would be like a general message? Of course, especially when we're speaking to the foreign audience and to the audience which probably can't that easily count. Is it anything beyond the figures? Like, what is a long-term effect? Somebody would say we have lost Donbas overall because any kind of further cooperation, or if Ukraine won't reintegrate Donbas, it needs to have some trade. That would be the instrument to go on with the relations. But there are totally opposite ideas that, like we can totally exclude any kind of the cooperation with Russia and Donbas temporary. So kind of shortly, can you express what are your points on that as well? Whoever who would like to address that first.
Yeah, for me, it is obviously a very big loss. Like, we have assets that belong to Ukrainian legal entities, that belong to Ukrainian nationals, and like with all our negative opinion on oligarchs, and like there is a truth in this negative opinion. In any case, these are Ukrainian nationals that own assets, that in fact owned assets there. There are Ukrainian citizens that work on controlled territories that lose some well-being because of this. Like, we mean here both like management staff that is working on controlled territories. We mean, like, for example, people working in Mariupol on ferrous metals plants that are owned by the same Akhmetov's group and that are dependent on these supplies. And I agree with colleagues that like some of these supplies could be like substituted by other sources, like by imports. But in any case, it will be a suboptimal decision. Like, some working places could be lost because of this, because like production of some goods could be not profitable enough. So in any case, it will be a loss. For me, just the most important is that they are assets that belong, in fact, to the Ukraine and to Ukrainian citizens. And plus, what you said that really, like, if we believe that this territory is a Ukrainian territory, like breaking economic links with this territory significantly decreases the chance that these territories will be returned to Ukraine.
Alexandr.
Well. Of course, I agree with Hlib, because in the long term, we are losing some part of our economy, which is definitely not good, which is definitely painful. But again, in the short term, as I already said, we can easily substitute these losses. We will have no negative effect on our currency. We shouldn't have any negative effect on our economic growth. So, of course, we potentially could have some negative effect on our budget income, but I'm not sure that it will be negative because, in fact, we have like 150 kilometers gap, some border, 150 kilometers long border, which we do not control, which means there is huge smuggling. You can deliver everything from Vladivostok to, I don't know, Kyiv or some other city without any customs. Nobody is paying customs, so we are losing. Our budget is losing. We don't know how much. We can only calculate this 2 billion. That's okay. But we have other issues which we cannot calculate. And these issues which forced these people to block all these railway routes because everybody understands that there is smuggling, which nobody controls. And this smuggling, it decays our government, our country from inside.
What about negative impacts that you can calculate? Because the IMF just said that they're going to postpone a meeting about the next $1 billion that was supposed to be loaned out as part of the aid package. So what happens now that things like that are coming in?
Well, if this postponement is like an attempt to blackmail Ukraine to stop the blockade, that could be like an issue, yeah. But I'm sure that it was just a technical postponement because, of course, we need to be sure, and the IMF needs to be sure that all that we have committed to do in the memorandum, it will be done on time. And when some macro parameters has changed and IMF or the IMF directors have some concerns about that, I think, yes, they have a right to sit down and rethink all these parameters. And I don't think it will affect somehow our program with the IMF.
So you
I think that corruption can affect our program, but no blockade.
So you think they're just taking time to look at it?
Yeah, of course.
In fact, it was a reasonable decision because like there was an official statement from the National Bank even before the decision was made by National Security Council that this blockade, even unofficial blockade, could have an impact of minus 1.3 percentage points on the Ukrainian GDP growth this year. So, like the force majeure of such a size should be taken into account into the program. So, like the most realistic version is that like really these delays of more technical nature. While I hope that IMF will also take into account like what is going on with the audit of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, which is also in the heart of the program.
So, of course, this become a political issue, and it is a political issue. There is no secret that the president had been before against the blockade, and it has taken some weeks to totally change the opinion, more or less, instead of being somebody who is opposed to run the movement. We would like to present to you the quotes of Petro Poroshenko on these blockades and how they had changed.
Blocking railways with temporary occupied territories of Ukraine and an attempt of economic blockade unfortunately became a destabilizing factor in recent days. As a result of joint efforts with the blockade by activists and terrorists, Ukraine has lost its factories and, unfortunately, it has evoked a new reality. So today I propose the National Security and Defence Council of Ukraine make a resolution about a permanent total block on all transport and not only railway connection with the occupied territories. It destroyed Ukraine in Donbass.
So shortly, this is a huge political change when, and the president doesn't look like a strategist. It's very incoherent. That's what the critic says. So how it can generally influence the situation and this move with the economic issue, the following situation?
For me, it is important to consider simultaneously the economic part of this reality and we could call it geopolitical part of the reality, because we understand that we are in hybrid war, which means that the rules of old wars where you need just territory and the territory is the most important are not working here. The general purpose of the Russian regime is to make Ukrainians think that Ukraine is a failed state. So they are ready to use any possible tool to prove this. And if for example this blockade and so-called nationalization of Ukrainian assets on these territories and those economic losses that will be a result of this will further undermine the trust of Ukrainians to the government in Kyiv, then they will be happy.
So we would like to give you the examples of on the international reaction. We would like to present to you because there was a general condemnation, more or less, of some of our foreign partners. The head of the delegation of the European Union to Ukraine said, until now, Ukraine has employed an all-exclusive approach towards the territory of Donbas, together with the fighting against trafficking. This exclusive approach guaranteed solutions to the humanitarian problems in Donbas and also facilitated the economic situation. We have fully supported such an approach. That is why yesterday's decision to impose a temporary blockade has surprised us.
And there was also a quote from the French government, and the French government said, France is also concerned by the Ukrainian government's decision of March 15th to impose a temporary blockade on the transportation of goods to the eastern part of the country. We call on the Ukrainian authorities to continue their efforts to lift the blockade of railroads at the contact line.
So we know all that Ukraine heavily depends from the point of view of the economy and the politics on our international partners. So how do you see what impact it would have because it's one of the factors, of course, which may influence. Oleksandr.
First of all, I want to add what Hlib said on the very beginning. So the blockade didn't start this week. It started in early February. And what happened this week, I think it's a very positive development, because the official blockade is much better than the unofficial blockade. Because official blockade is something that we all understand. We understand that it will be for some long time. There is some clarity, and there is clarity not only for us, but more importantly, it's the clarity for our government. Now the government understands that it should react somehow, because over the last months, there was no reaction. They were just sitting and waiting that this blockade will be somehow disappear. Now it's a new reality. And our government, our central bank, our ministries will adjust all their policies, all their moves to that new reality to minimize the negative effect in any area. And that's why I think that it is positive development, because it was clear that our government wasn't able to remove this blockade. So they decided to lead the blockade, and therefore, they will be able, I'm sure that they will be able to minimize all the negative consequences.
Okay, so thanks a lot, and we would like to remind our audience, our correspondent has covered the blockades that had been on the spot, what you called an unofficial blockade. This particular checkpoint, it's already non-existent. It has been more or less dismantled by the police, but that's how it looked before.
Ми сказали 20 чоловік, от мами їдуть забирати, приїжджають, і ми знаємо, що ми перемогли, да? Десь чуть-чуть.
Вже якісь кроки до перемоги зроблені.
Яким чином Ахметов може вплинути на рішення щодо звільнення полонених, якщо вони контролюються бойовиками, які в свою чергу контролюються росіянами?
Ну, він якось там працював 3 роки. Він ж якось домовився про взагалі функціонування підприємств на тій території. Він якось домовився про переміщення вантажів. Тобто це він з кимось фізично мав говорити.
Якщо полонені
Вони цього
звільнені, то знову відновиться транспортне сполучення?
Я не можу відповідь на це питання дати, бо тому що, я ще раз кажу, я не приймаю рішення.
А люди думають, що ми ще й перекрили дорогу. Ні, ми дорогу не перекриваємо. Проїзд по дорозі через цей переїзд вільний.
Чесно кажучи. Пам'ятаєте, який сам?
Місцеві ось вулиця, місцеві часто приходять, кажуть, що ви правильно все робите.
Хлопцы, кто хочет сказать пару слов, может быть, передать привет, сказать, что приезжали, сказать, что вы тут делаете?
Ми приглашаємо своїх побратимів, друзів, щоб вони приїжджали на блокаду.
Скажите, пожалуйста, а как вы относитесь к блокаде железнодорожного сообщения? Нормально в каком смысле? Поддерживаете?
Положительно, можно сказать так.
Объясните, почему?
Как почему? Блокада почему? Зачем сделали? И не было торговли во время войны.
Я сказала, меня не трогайте.
Хорошо.
Сейчас опасно вообще говорить что-нибудь.
Very few trusted organizations can work at the both sides of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. I'm speaking about the Donbas. And just some time ago, our colleague Zhanna Bespenchuk in this studio has talked to the Fiona Frazer, who is the head of the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine. They are those who have access, not everywhere. They even managed to go to the prisons on the front line, and they have presented the report on the human rights violation, and the recent human rights violation. Of course, it had increased. I say of course because of course the longer conflict lasts, the more it happened. It's all about the situations in prison, the lack of the medical facilities and medical help, and as well on if the UN can facilitate the process of the prisoners exchange.
You mentioned that your report that UN mission for human rights has taken actions. Some activities are in order to improve the situation with human rights in the occupied territories. What exactly you have done?
Well, yes, as you've rightly pointed out, I've just launched our 17th quarterly public report that covers the period from the 16th of November 2016 to the 15th of February 2017. The Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine, we've been here now for over 3 years, works on both sides of the contact line directly in the conflict-affected area. We work day in, day out, interviewing victims and witnesses of violations of international human rights law and international humanitarian law. And then we verify this information, document it, advocate with relevant authorities, refer cases to humanitarian organizations, and undertake interventions and then issue these public reports.
Why are these concerns raised after these meetings that are in this report?
So the conflict-related sexual violence report that we did covers a period from April 2014 until February 2017. So it's looking at the whole time frame of the armed conflict. And so the recent visits that we undertook to places where people were detained were not directly linked to this report. Conflict-related sexual violence is part of gender-based violence. Conflict-related sexual violence is not only about violence that is acted against women, it is also about violence which perpetrators commit against men as well. The issue is that it's obviously in the scope of a conflict, both in the time frame, in the location, the geography, and again, as I said, we particularly focused on people who have been detained and were in detention and then faced sexual violence during the conflict.
Also, the report provides very important figure that you have the data, the documented data of 23 deaths, death toll, 23 persons, civilians, casualties within this period under monitoring. How you document, which deaths you document, in which way, how this figure emerged?
So we have been consistently documenting civilian casualties that have taken place, occurred during the conflict. When we talk about civilian casualties, it's clearly both people who have died and people who have been injured. We give an estimated figure of a total figure for these civilian casualties, and the figure you're referring to, the 23 civilian deaths during the time frame of this report, came about because of shelling, again on both sides of the contact line. And there was a particularly critical moment during the spike in hostilities between the 28th of January and the 5th of February around the triangle of Avdiivka, Yasinovatha, and Donetsk airport, where we saw a high number of civilian casualties. We make the point in the report that while this is actually a decrease in the number of civilian casualties since our last reporting period, the 3 months prior to November the 15th, it is actually an increase in the number of civilian casualties in comparison to 1 year ago. And also the majority of those individuals who were killed, some 12, were mostly due to shelling. With regard to your question about how we gather the information, we go to the sites where a civilian casualty has unfortunately occurred. We talk to if they're injured, we talk to individuals, we talk to witnesses, we go to the morgues if necessary, hospitals, we cross-reference with law enforcement bodies. So we really try to verify from a number of different sources the information that we have. And we also work very closely with other international partners on this issue, including the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission.
17 reports. What dynamic do you observe in terms of human rights protection? Don't you see the freezing of the situation, or maybe improvements, or maybe regress instead, backlash, setback? What do you observe?
Well, I think what we've seen is that the conflict has led to some systemic human rights violations that were here in Ukraine before the conflict even started becoming more acute. I've mentioned already one, the use and practice while people are in detention of ill treatment and torture. That's one very specific. But we have also seen that there has been an openness and willingness to address some very specific violations. And I think what's important is that there's also legislation being put in place, particularly around the judicial reform that's also coming into place. That's absolutely key for questions when it comes to accountability for crimes that have taken place before the conflict and also obviously in relation to the conflict. So it varies, but I think what's essential in any country is that if there's an openness and a willingness of a state to actually discuss address and try to make efforts to meet its human rights obligations, and I think that's what we see here.
In studio today, we have a very special guest with us, the Canadian ambassador, Waschuk, who has served as Canada's ambassador to Ukraine since October 2014. And first off, Roman, we wanted to bring up the historic trade agreement that was signed between Ukraine and Canada in 2016 and was just ratified by the Ukrainian parliament.
Yes.
So the first question would be, symbolically, what does this agreement mean, and in practice, what does this agreement actually do?
What it does, first of all, what it means. What it means is Canada is open for Ukraine. That's the symbolic meaning. We have opened up with this agreement 98% of our market duty-free and quota-free for Ukraine. That's the biggest opening of any of Ukraine's trade agreements, apart from the now not quite operational CIS agreement. So a lot of the things that Ukrainians have difficulty getting into other markets, they'll be able to get into Canada's market problem-free. We still probably have a few weeks to go on the Canadian end for third reading in the Senate, royal assent, signature by the Governor-General, and then exchange of letters. So we expect by midsummer this thing should be operational.
Okay. And what does it actually do? Like from
We have a graph, of course. We have prepared that, but really you can really tell it.
Okay.
To us.
Let's say you're a Ukrainian manufacturer of, let's say, coats or men's pants. Up until now, you've had to pay, or the importers had to pay 14, I think, or 15% duty. Now it's 0.
Okay.
So suddenly you've become that much more competitive in our market. Similarly, if you're a canner of peaches or apricots and you want to ship them to Canada, before you may have had a duty of, I think there's something around 7 or 8%. Now it's 0. So suddenly you've just got a price advantage over other countries that don't have a free trade agreement with Canada.
And by Canada now about to ratify this free trade agreement with Ukraine, does it legitimize Ukraine as a trading partner for other G7 countries as well?
I think we hope it'll have a kind of positive halo effect. And the one thing that we've noticed about our free trade agreements is, A, they tend to at least double trade within the first couple of years, but they also tend to double investment, even though they're not investment agreements per se. But what it does is it attracts people's attention to this trading relationship, and they begin to look at offers, ideas for working with that country that they may never have thought of before.
Right.
And we're certainly seeing also a positive dynamic on the investment side.
And how would it interact with the EU free trade agreement that Canada signed?
Right. We're hoping and working on a kind of virtuous triangle. Because, for example, if you want to be a European manufacturer shipping into Canada duty-free, you now could locate some of that production in Ukraine. Similarly, Canadians wanting to export into Europe duty-free could locate some of their production in Ukraine as well.
Okay.
It's basically, the other good thing it does is, given the fact that we're also ratifying the EU agreement with Canada-EU as well, at the same time, it means that we've already harmonized many of our standards with those of the EU, so is Ukraine.
Right.
So it means we've come a lot closer on health standards, safety standards, product standards than before. So that makes life easier. If a Ukrainian company is qualified for Europe, it's probably now qualified for Canada too.
Okay.
Do we already know, before we to finish with that, do we know about any kind of a new deals which are coming? So what is, has something already big started, or we are still expecting?
Well, what we're seeing in the Ukraine to Canada direction, and again, the deal isn't yet in force, but we've begun to see more traction for Ukrainian companies. We're seeing some deals in the food sector. We've run some visits, and we're running some more this spring for Ukrainian food manufacturers to network with Canadian supermarkets, and not just target the small ethnic market, sell mushrooms to people from Eastern Europe, but to come into the big Canadian nationwide networks.
And what are the concerns of probably Canadian businessmen? They probably ask you sometimes when they hear, like there are the Ukrainians in Canada, of course, but we're not speaking about them. They're speaking, this country, they have all these troubles with their war, corruption, all the things. What are the questions they ask?
People are concerned. I think what I do is I tell them it's a big country by European standards. I think Canadians are used to thinking of European countries as being small. Ukraine is about 25 Belgiums. So trouble at one end doesn't mean it's hot and impossible at the other end of the country. We're seeing, for example, a major boost in exports of concentrated apple juice coming from Western Ukraine to Canada. So you can source, Ukraine's a big country, you can source things. And also, it's not like Canadian business has never dealt with countries dealing with localized conflict before. We work very closely with a partner like Mexico in NAFTA. Mexico has had pretty traumatic experiences with what people there call a drug war. Of course, it's been a high degree of civil unrest, but affecting certain parts of the country, but then others have done business very effectively with Canada. Same with Colombia. Again, all comparisons are false. But there are ways of working with Ukraine, and especially I think clients in the IT sector have been very, very pleased and are also increasing their engagement with Ukraine right now.
Canada has, hugely supported Ukraine within the next during the last couple of years. We'll also have some figures for you. So there is a 6.6 million over 3 years to support the police training and system project, up to 1.5 million for police equipment, over 700 million technical and financial assistance to help restore stability, improve security, and implement democracy and the reforms. There are some other figures, so it's a bilateral development assistance to support economic reforms. Again, there are the funds for the negotiations. So it's all there, but and what we know, it's really the 10th part of the Canadian foreign aid for the countries.
Yeah, we were looking at the numbers, and since 2015 was obviously a big year for Canada to contribute to Ukraine. The numbers were staggering. It was almost about 10% of the international assistance budget of Canada went to Ukraine, which was about $500 million.
That included two big loans.
Right. Yeah. Are those numbers that are going, like the 2016 stats haven't come out yet, but
we're not going to repeat 2015.
Right.
That was an exceptional year. And I think some of the figures you've got there are a bit generous in that some of them are actually overlapping. Some of them relate to programs that are counted several times in your chart. But there's lots going on, no doubt. We have just extended our military mission, Operation Unifier. Keeping 200 soldiers abroad is not a cheap thing, and also we pay for a lot of the expenses of our Ukrainian partners as well. In doing this, we find it's been very effective, and we're looking over the next 2 years, because it's been extended to 2019, to kind of go up the value chain and look to see if we can have more impact by training non-commissioned personnel, officers, and others as we go forward with that mission. Certainly also carrying on with our development assistance, we will stay engaged on the humanitarian side as well with the police and other security agencies. That's very promising. We've got right now, I think 13, but could be up to 20 serving police officers also working as mentors with Ukrainian police.
What would you tell Canadians that they can expect as a return on that money?
They can expect a more successful, stable, and prosperous Ukraine that will be a better economic and security partner for us. I mean, last year was already a record year for Canadian exports to Ukraine since 1991. Your previous guests were talking about coal supplies. We are seeing a major acceleration in Canadian coal exports to Ukraine.
But Ambassador, there is a tweet we would like quote. Your tweet, you said, when it comes to rule of law and the integrity, we diplomats may be polite and well-meaning, but we are not blindly naive. So really, with all that support, you know, like, are all this money used in a good way? You know, do you feel that something could be, I know, either stolen or somebody would be not efficient? And these are the funds. I mean, I'm a Ukrainian citizen. Of course, I would say that would be good. Canada supports Ukraine, but you're accountable for the money of the people who paid for the taxpayers. Also, Ukrainian taxpayers care where their money go, and also don't want that their foreign funds are misused.
Yeah, that's why we target carefully. We generally don't simply give money to untested government entities. We work with partners who have a track record, whether it's civil society, whether it's international implementation partners. So, you know, we're very careful in the audit trail of what we do. That's why we want the audit of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau to be decided transparently, fairly, in a way that both Ukrainians and foreign partners can trust as well.
But aren't you frustrated somehow at some points with how slow the reforms are, or other particular things which raise your concern?
You know, if Ukraine were a simple case and like easy, snap your fingers and it's done, it would be marvelous, but it's not. It's a long, iterative process. Plus, I'm a lifelong bureaucrat, and I know that changes, especially in government, are not instantaneous. So it means you have to keep at it. I think it's very important to keep a sense of perspective, not to get freaked out about every deviation from an agreed plan as the end of reform as we know it. It means keeping both support and applying advocacy when required.
So what are the fields where you think there is a progress and where you closely looking with some hope that things would be not so disappointing?
Ooh, that's a triple reverse negative there, I think. Well, where I see progress is at local level. Decentralization is something that has happened on the financial side. Especially, it means local communities have many more resources. We have a project that works with 16 cities in 4 oblasts of Ukraine on local economic development and strategizing. And, you know, some people have asked me, writing another strategy, how useless is that? But in fact, when you've got a community that now has more money than ever, and mayors and councillors and civil society and business need to decide together on how to spend it, so that you don't just patch another window or fix a road, but actually start working strategically, that is a good place to be. And what I've been hearing from mayors for the past 6 months is we used to be in survival mode, now we are in actual growth and doing something permanent for our communities mode. So I find that very positive. I think the rule of law is Ukraine's major Achilles heel. There's a sort of, you know, the go-along to get-along culture of people in power gets in the way of actually finishing any case that has been started. So therefore, there is considerable attention to high-profile cases, to the audit function at NABU. We are supporting, but also watching closely, the recreation of the Supreme Court. We have for years supported judicial training, but now also have a project that is supporting this reform. I think as well that there would be room for some pilots of local level courts as well, so you don't have to wait 2 or 3 years for change at the local sort of judicial level. That's the area that I think it bothers Ukrainians most, and what bothers them then starts bothering us.
And when we look at the, global politics, of course, we're looking closely. We're discussing all the time the change in the White House in the United States. And therefore, Canada has become and is, one of the strongest, let's say, allies of Ukraine in G7. If we speak about the big powers and somebody who speaks totally different on Russia if we compare with Mr. Trump. Hristya Freeland, your new Minister of Foreign Affairs, who has Ukrainian roots and who has worked here and in Russia, knows well the situation. So how you can really explain her role, what we can expect of the, because there are, of course, the expectation, and how much she can do being somebody, a person who is not allowed to, and banned to travel to Russia, who has a totally, pretty unusual, relations and pretty unusual person if we speak about the foreign ministers, a former journalist.
Yeah. Her job one in the past couple of months has been to ensure that we have a viable relationship with the new administration in the U.S. I think she's done a very good job of that, as has our Prime Minister. They have gone the extra mile to build relationships, to even where there are policy differences, to keep dialogue open and to show openness in various ways, even through culture. The Prime Minister was in New York beginning of this past week. Broadway show, Come From Away, a Canadian Broadway show, about openness to people who come to your country. In this case, planes diverted on 9/11, but it's, you have to find various subtle ways of getting your message across, but in a way that doesn't also disrupt the relations with what is for us a very important partner. So we see ourselves as being able to, help bridge some of the gaps that may be emerging. Again, all of our G7 partners have their own dialogue channels, but we currently have good open channels with all of them. And we think that's an asset in terms of that Canada can bring also with regard to Ukraine and its issues.
How it will talk and how she will talk to the Kremlin?
That has yet to occur, so I am not going to prejudge how it's going to happen. We obviously have diplomatic relations. My colleague in Moscow is on the job. It is something that is in part also up to Russia. I think when the question was posed at the press conference announcing her appointment, and she was asked, do you see that as a problem? She said, it's Russia's problem. So I think we will be waiting for some outreach from there.
Do you see Canada taking more of a leadership role when it comes to the Western response to Ukraine? Because the U.S. foreign policy towards Ukraine is, at best, seems scattered right now?
Again, we are not commentators on other people's foreign policies, and we are pursuing what Canadians expect. Canadians expect a Canadian policy that strongly supports Ukraine and that acts on it in a multilateral context as well as the bilateral context. So that's what we're going to be doing. I think you just need to look at the votes on the free trade agreement that we started off talking about. In the House of Commons, 304 to nothing in favor, in the Senate, 102 to nothing in favor. So there is in the Canadian political spectrum, complete consensus on this. And the government acts accordingly.
Mr. Ambassador, thanks a lot for all the points. We really enjoyed the talk, and we'll be back in a second. Okay, so there is something to say. The 3 years after Russia had organized and carried out an illegal referendum in Crimea designed to give the annexation of the peninsula the appearance of legally civilized process. So official Moscow and its Russian-controlled media still systematically circulate the same myth. They say that Russia took Crimea peacefully without firing a single shot and not spilling a drop of blood. So therefore, we really invite you to read our publication, which is still debunking the myth on the first day of the annexation, because there were shootings, there were injuries, there were deaths. Moreover, among them, there were Ukrainian soldiers and civilians who opposed the secession of Crimea from Ukraine. So please go to our webpage, en.hromadske.ua, to read that story. But before, there is a story I'd like to present as well. That is a story about the Crimean solidarity. So this is the more or less a new movement, a new organization. It's not kind of formal. That's the story I've brought from Crimea about how the families of the relatives of the Crimean Tatars, and not just Crimean Tatars, who gathered together to support each other. And this is a pretty, I would say, sad experience when you come to the room with 60 children and know all of them are the kids of the political prisoners. So probably that would be the report from us to you, and that would be the end of our show. Thanks a lot, and see you in a week.
Диана.
This may seem like a nice, fun children's party, but you have to understand that probably all of the children in this room are children of political prisoners or missing people. So, once a month, these Crimean Tatars organise a happy event for the children, which also gives the parents a chance to speak to each other and decide what to do next.
I'm one of the coordinators of the organisation Crimean Solidarity. The aim of the organisation is to help families of political prisoners, people who have been kidnapped and those that are missing. We have another Crimean Solidarity meeting today. Considering the current legal situation, or frankly speaking, the lack thereof, because we don't have rights as such, we understand that we can't legally protect our rights. One of the issues we can solve is the financial one. Families were deprived of their breadwinners. Some families have 4, 5, or even 7 children. These families with small children were deprived of their breadwinners. Before my father was arrested at the Bakhchisarai on 12th of May, I used to study science and had nothing to do with human rights.
Unfortunately, we only see them at court hearings. It's a big deal for us when it's not a video conference, but when they are actually brought to the court. Then it's live, real communication. He worked in construction. He was a civil activist. The first couple of days shocked me, the day he was searched and for a while after that. There was a court hearing on the 12th of February, and I can say on behalf of all the wives that first they carry out a search and the next day the court hearings are held. And then false accusations are made by the prosecutors, investigators and judges. They were accused under such articles. We live with these people for so long. I've known my husband for 24 years. We've been married for 20 and we went out for 4. In 24 years, I would have realized if something was wrong with him.
We come together every month. It's like a tradition. Today is our 11th meeting. Our group is expanding. It has expanded thanks to the government, which has been arresting people. 22 people are in pre-trial detention facility. 3 of them have already been sent to prison. They will serve their sentences in that camp for 5 years. It's difficult to tell what is important and what is not. Repression has taken various forms, and each one is followed through rigorously and demands our whole attention. One of the main issues in Crimea is the arrest of activists. We have been saying this for a long time, that there would be mass arrests. since Russia's main goal is to liquidate all transparency in court hearings, in raids and other special operations. The task is prevention. People get scared, so they stay at home. When you get arrested a second time for the same charge, you get up to 30 days in prison.